Do you have any cowboy boots, Sarah?
I don't.
Yeah,
I don't.
okay.
I'm sorry. I am just like
They go with
not-
everything. Hans is looking at us like,
They do
guys,
not
we
go with
gotta
everything.
start taping.
They do not go with everything.
Go with-
I'm sorry.
They go with a lot of stuff.
Okay.
I wear
I
them
feel
with
like
a
they
lot of
do,
stuff.
though. Like they look good with like a shorter dress. I feel like.
Cargo shorts.
I mean,
They
cargo
could,
shorts
honestly,
should
that
never
would
be
a
worn.
statement. I think it could work. I am on board with the cowboy boots.
Knee-high socks and cargo shorts with cowboy boots.
Knee-high socks look very cute with cowboy boots.
Time to get this train back on the rails. Time to get this
Saddle
Bronco.
up, partner.
Stop this Bronco from kicking.
It's time for sound politics. I couldn't even say it.
This is Sound Politics. I'm Scott Greenstone.
And I'm Kat Smith in for Libby Dankman, and we're here with KUOW's state politics reporter, Sarah Mises-Tan. Hi, Sarah.
Hello. Good to be here.
Gosh, it's thank you for jumping in last minute, Kat. I saw
I'm
Libby
Libby.
Dankman
I'm not Libby Dankman
in the script, and I thought, wait a second, why isn't she saying she's Libby Dankman? Because she's not. She's Kat Smith, and she's here. And Sarah, you're here too. We have had you on the show before to talk about some intra-party Democrat on Democrat fights. There are, as we've talked about, a bunch of legislative races where Democrats are duking it out against each other, including this one really intense race and really important race here in lefty Capitol Hill and surrounding areas of Seattle. The Democrats are fighting, and there have been some interesting developments in that story.
Yeah,
right?
especially on the national stage. In New York City's new mayor, Zoran Mamdani, endorsed a few outsider candidates in U.S. House primaries, and all of them ended up winning their elections against establishment Democrats.
And that, I think, has definitely spurred some of the developments here. That intense Seattle race I mentioned, Mayor Katie Wilson threw her endorsement behind not the incumbents. She is backing a couple lefty challengers to the Democrats that have held those Seattle legislative seats. And all of this might lead you to believe, all this drama might make you think we're seeing a repeat of what happened in New York.
Are we, Scott?
Ahead of this, August 4th primary that's coming up. Are we? Not so fast,
okay.
I would say. Seattle is not New York. I'm here to say it. Big headline.
Our pizza is much worse, I'll tell you that.
Our hot dogs are better, according to the New York Times. But this Seattle race that we are going to focus on is, and a lot of these races I think that are happening right now, they are not straight up socialist versus moderate. Right, Sarah? Do you agree? Do you disagree?
Yeah, totally. No, it's not that clear cut here in these races. With the state Senate race in the 43rd legislative district, so Capitol Hill neighborhood of Seattle, you're talking about a progressive primary challenge, but not a challenge from an out and proud Democratic socialist like what we saw in New York.
Okay.
That's not Hannah Sabio Howell. It's true that the 43rd is potentially the most liberal district in Washington. And the race that we've been watching is super interesting. We see arguably, kind of recap for folks who haven't been paying attention, arguably one of the most powerful Democrats in the state, Senate Majority Leader Jamie Peterson, is being challenged by young upstart Hannah Sabio Howell. Like I said, neither identifies as Democratic Socialists. Sabio Howell's campaign has not been endorsed by the Democratic Socialist Party of America or any explicit socialist labels that Mamdani's campaign embraced. I think Sabio Howell's message isn't that she's a different party from Peterson. It's that she's a different brand of Democrat, which I think is pretty interesting. One that is further to the left, more pro-labor and more grassroots, but not a socialist, at least not officially registered as one.
And she hasn't said, I'm not a socialist. She just doesn't really say socialist. Is that right? She doesn't use that label?
Yeah, she just doesn't have the label. She has been endorsed, actually, by a socialist, Representative Sean Scott.
And we should say the mayor also says she's a socialist, and she endorsed Hannah.
Well, okay, let's hold on, though. But so Peterson it's not like he's some traditional moderate, though. Like Jamie Peterson was the architect of the income tax on high earners, probably one of the most progressive pieces of legislation in state history. So these lines here, this isn't like a clear, one-to-one comparison to some of these other races that we're seeing around the country where, Democratic Socialists are challenging moderates. That's not quite what's going on here. Right, Sarah?
Totally. Yeah. I do think it is important to say that, I think there are definitely a lot of people out there who are scratching their heads at this challenge because, while Peterson's opposition has tried to paint him as this like establishment corporate Democrat, he's also the person in Olympia who has pushed forward one of the most progressive tax packages in state history, the so-called millionaire's tax.
Like we mentioned,
I think this is a really good tension to get into, and I want to get into it today because in Western Washington, if the divide here is not so much socialist versus centrist, and we've been talking about the Peterson challenge, but you can look across Western Washington
the
and
Democrats are still fighting each other.
The Democrats are still fighting each other. It's not always the socialists coming after the Democrats. So if it's not that, what is the Democratic intra-party fight even about? And what can polls or policies tell us about why Democrats are beginning to turn against the establishment? All of that after the break.
From KUOW in Seattle, this is Sound Politics. I'm Kat Smith.
And I'm Scott Greenstone. And we are also here with KUOW's Sarah Meisestan down there in Olympia. And Sarah, you have been following this challenge by Hannah Sabio Howell. She's taking on the state Senate Majority Leader. Before we get there, I want to put this race and our local races in the national context. So lefty candidates, often candidates aligned with the Democratic Socialists of America, have been surging in Democratic primaries in Denver, in Philadelphia, and especially in New York, where Mayor Zoran Mamdani has been lending them momentum to beat two incumbent congressional Democrats. And here in Washington, a bunch of insurgent Dems are trying to capitalize on this energy. They are not all socialists. How would we say that?
Some of them
all
are.
of them are trying to capitalize on the energy, but not all are capitalism, socialism.
Oh, I see what
I did there?
Took me a minute.
Some of them, okay, so some of them are socialists, some of them are not. They're all trying to capitalize on the energy. Sarah, what is going on here?
Yeah. There are about half a dozen or a little more of those races with Democratic challengers challenging sitting incumbent Democrats, but not all of them are those true lefty challengers even to sitting incumbents. I think in some of those races, it's hard to say if folks are challenging them from even further on the left or if they're more moderate. And not all of them are as intense as the Sabio Howell and Peterson race.
Well, that's for sure.
Yeah. And we don't know the exact reasons, but it is clear that these insurgent candidates are resonating with voters. A few thoughts I have on why this could be.
Yeah, sure.
I think it's entirely possible that, like we were talking about, the messaging of the Democratic Socialists of America, the DSA, is really resonating with an energized or large section of the Democratic base. These races are happening in deep blue districts. From political consultants I've spoken with who've been watching these races, I think the thought is that right now there's kind of just general dissatisfaction with the current establishment Democratic Party. And that feeling is sweeping across the country. And Washington is absolutely feeling that. They've cited things like disillusionment with the party establishment and anger over the rising cost of living in the country, Trump's administration and his policies that are getting put in place. I've been told that basically when a base gets upset, it isn't uncommon for them to just start seeking something new, even if the current party in power or the exact leaders in power don't necessarily have anything to do with what they're being upset about. In short, basically, when people are unhappy with the course of their lives in any sort of way, they just want change.
The course of their lives. That's real. Wow.
I'm not happy. Throw them all out.
Pretty much.
I'm kind of curious, too,
right.
if like in a one-party, area like this where the Dems just run the board, if there is sort of, and I think we'll probably get into this later, but there is just sort of this thing of like, well, do we naturally sort of seek an alternative to, if a Democrat is always winning, do we say, well, what about a Democratic Socialist? Is it almost like the emergence of a third party within that two-party system? But I want to talk specifically about these dynamics. Like, do you see them in this 43rd district race, Sarah, the one that we've been talking about between Sabio Howell and Peterson?
Totally. Yeah, I do think that we can see echoes of this national dissatisfaction in the 43rd legislative district and in Seattle pretty clearly in this race. Here's Sabio Howell on Cairo Radio in May.
politics as usual, status quo government has resulted in an affordability crisis that I think lawmakers in power are not addressing with the urgency that it deserves.
Okay, that's what you were just talking about, Sarah.
Totally. Yeah. When I talked with her earlier this year, she mentioned explicitly that she felt that Jamie Peterson was just out of touch with his district. And that was a big reason for why she was running. She mentioned that people in the 43rd who she's spoken with are frustrated about things like affordability of housing and childcare, two things that she doesn't think Senator Peterson has done much to directly address. And I think there's a sentiment that the millionaire's tax is basically just too little too late.
Meanwhile, Peterson and his allies have been on the campaign trail trying to counter that message, saying he is the most progressive state caucus leader ever.
Which they're kind of right.
I mean, and he architect of the state income tax on people earning over $1 million. That has been a goal of progressive Dems in the state for a long time.
Yes.
So this, like we mentioned, this isn't the traditional moderate that we were seeing being challenged across the country. So, Sarah, how concerned is Peterson about this challenge?
Yeah, actually, he really is. The race is forcing him to burnish his progressive creds, of which he does have many. Here's the Senate Majority Leader at a candidate forum back in June.
I think the results of having someone leading the Senate from the most progressive district in the state are self-evident. We passed unemployment insurance for striking workers, rent stabilization, the Recycling Reform Act, the permit to purchase for gun purchases, the millionaire's tax, and transgender privacy protections, all of which before had been on the cutting room floor.
Yeah, okay, that's quite a list.
Yeah. So I do think it's fair to say it might be too broad of a brush to say Peterson is just another corporate Democrat, though, of course, there are also elements of that in him.
Yeah, literally.
He's a lawyer for a big construction company, McKinstry. It's literally a big corporation.
Yeah, right.
He works for them when he's not in the legislature, and they pay him a salary that is around $700,000 annually. Most of the constituents in his district, by comparison, are probably making around $100,000 a year. He's a homeowner in a district where housing prices are notoriously high and most people are renters. So just some things to consider. And these are points that Sabio Howell has pointed out also. But, he's also pushed for taxes on the wealthy, like the millionaire's tax. He supported the creation of the state's capital gains tax. But Sabio Howell's campaign claims he isn't going far enough to push progressive legislation fast enough. And whether you think that argument holds water or not, her campaign is having an impact, and it does have Peterson paying attention.
It's really interesting that you say the average person in that district is probably making around $100K. It's probably a really, if I had to guess without looking at numbers, the disparity has to be, just incredible between, like, say, a barista living on Capitol Hill, who's certainly not making anywhere near $100K a year, and, like, a homeowner in Leschi who's probably making more than Peterson or certainly owns, a home that is worth a lot more. I just want to, before we move into the next thing that we were going to talk about, the next development in this race, I do just want to circle back to this socialist question. Peterson recently told the Seattle Times that he saw a poll, he commissioned a poll in his district that found that the Democratic Socialists of America, who we've been talking about, have a higher approval rating in his district than the Democratic Party. And who knows if Hannah Sabio Howell can capitalize on that, because, again, like we've talked about, she's not necessarily an out-and-out socialist, but, like, that's crazy or that's really, I don't know that it's crazy. It is really profound to kind of consider when you think about dissatisfaction with the voter base. It's a really good example of what we're talking about. We have talked about this race before. The biggest development in this race since we talked about it last is in the wonderful world of political endorsements. And I want to talk about political endorsements because they can tell us all the weird ways the Democratic Party, especially, or lefties or progressive voters in this area are really divided between these two. And they might be able to tell us something about, just like how people are weighing this choice. When it comes to endorsements, listener, there is one that is more important in Seattle than any other in a primary like the one coming up in August. And that is the endorsement of the alt weekly, The Stranger. And there is a whole big chunk of Seattle voters who, especially in the primary, they just vote exactly how the stranger tells them, whether that is lefty, defund the police types. And I'm not just saying that. Like, I've talked to candidates who have told me that before. They could say, vote for this lefty, defund the police type candidate. They have even persuaded people to vote for perennial kind of joke candidates when they didn't like the mainstream choices. Once, years and years ago, they persuaded a not small chunk of Capitol Hill to vote for a Republican.
That's wild.
But whenever they can, they are endorsing lefties. The New York Times last year called them a progressive kingmaker. And I mean, Seattle's mayor is not only a stranger endorsee, but a former stranger columnist.
Yeah.
So that's how important that endorsement is.
Yeah, that paper holds a lot of sway, and particularly in Peterson's district, the one we've been talking about. And again, just to recap, that includes Capitol Hill and part of the U District where we're recording this, downtown Seattle and Fremont. And for years, The Stranger has been sort of like an anti-establishment group. That's kind of part of their brand. So a lot of people were surprised when they endorsed Jamie Peterson in this race. Yes.
Sort of. Like we've been talking about is complicated. But they were so surprised. Some people were so surprised online that there have been conspiracy theories about like maybe the owner of The Stranger putting his thumb on the scale. He used to be seatmates with Peterson. And there is, of course, no actual evidence for that.
Important to note that.
Yeah, I did ask around about this.
Okay, The Stranger comes out, endorses Jamie Peterson, and I'm wondering how big of a blow that is for Sabio Howell. Like the editorial board at The Stranger weren't exactly down on Sabio Howell as much as they were up on Peterson. And they said that he's the, quote, most progressive Senate Majority Leader in state history. He's in the middle of a crusade to completely reform the second most regressive tax structure in the country, end quote. And this is the central tension of this race, right?
Yeah.
Is Peterson too progressive for the accusations of being a moderate to stick to him?
I will just quibble a little bit and say they were oddly down on Sabio Howell at a few points. Like they mentioned that they said she should have started in a different district and in the House if she was going to run, which the House is usually considered the less senior chamber. It's like the
so like take baby steps.
But she lives in this district and she worked for the state Senate for years. So I thought that was a weird argument. But Sabio Howell does have other endorsements showing how this race is splitting the left in weird ways. We mentioned that of Mayor Katie Wilson. We talked a little bit about Mamdani endorsing liberal candidates in New York. And shortly after that announcement that Mamdani's endorsements had a big effect in the New York primaries, Wilson weighed in on a few races for seats in Olympia, including this one. So I think there is like this question of like, who are progressives going to trust?
Yeah.
The progressive mayor, the socialist mayor, or the progressive socialist alt weekly?
Totally. Yeah, I think that's a legitimate question. I mean, I do think it's so interesting that The Stranger ultimately didn't endorse Sabio Howell.
Yeah.
I think that took both Peterson and Sabio Howell's campaigns by surprise. I remember reading some polling that Peterson's campaign had been doing. They had actually assumed an endorsement from The Stranger for Sabio Howell in their polling that they released some months ago.
Whatever's going on here, it really does feel like this is a moment for Democrats in deep blue districts, right? Like one defining factor about this race in the 43rd that we're talking about is that a Republican doesn't have a snowball's chance in hell
like
in this
9%,
race.
I think I saw was the last margin for a Republican.
Yeah, and like this is something that I've heard from political consultants in the past too, is that Republicans just aren't really much of a force in the Seattle area. So when you mostly have a pool of Democrats to pick from, you're going to start to see these fractures in the party emerge more starkly.
Yeah. So we get a really good picture of how Democrats are feeling and weighing all these different ideas from the endorsements. That's why we talked about them for a minute. We still don't know where the fault line really is. Yeah.
I mean, is it socialist versus business friendly? Is it progressive versus moderate? Is it outsider versus establishment? We don't really know why these candidates are resonating with voters in a lot of ways.
So we wanted to talk with someone to like dig into that question, all those questions that you just threw out, Sarah. And so we invited on the podcast Ben Anderstone, who is a partner at Progressive Strategies Northwest. I have asked in the past if I can call him a numbers guy, and he has said, fine. So Ben Anderstone, thanks for joining Sound Politics.
Thanks so much for having me, Scott.
So we've been talking about this race in the 43rd Legislative District. Senate Majority Leader Jamie Peterson is facing a challenge from Hannah Sabio Howell. Mm-hmm. Progressive challenges have been successful in cities like New York and Denver. When you look at polling about why liberal voters are going for outsider candidates, what are their reasons?
Yeah, it's an interesting time right now because we're not seeing a big change in the polling in terms of the values or ideology that Democratic voters espouse. So they actually think, by and large, that the party is in a pretty good place on those issues where
like it's not too far left or too centrist.
Yeah, basically that they have the right values. But when you look at the numbers around effectiveness and fight, that's where Democratic Party members give the party the lowest ranks by far. They also tend to consider it to be out of touch right now. So a lot of this is probably animated less by sort of maybe the ideological stakes that a lot of us insiders think about in these races, and a lot more on this kind of sense of frustration and inertia that Democratic primary voters are feeling.
Mm-hmm. So when we hear Hannah Sabio Howell say,
Jamie Peterson's
too little,
out of touch.
Yeah, that he's out of touch, and that the millionaire's tax was maybe too little, too late. Has been. I don't know if she said that straight up, but that's the sense we get. Like she's maybe saying that because of polling she's looking at that shows that resonates with young Democratic voters.
Right, and ultimately that's probably the right place to be electorally. We've got a incumbent in this who's got some progressive credentials.
Yeah,
Seattle Democrats are, by and large, pretty left as big city Democrats go, in part because we don't really have the conservative voter base that we've got in places like New York, where 35% of the electorate voted for Donald Trump compared to 9% in Seattle. Yeah. So dramatically different cities with dramatically different Democrats, but that shared feeling that not enough is happening, that what's happening is too little too late, that is animating Democrats nationally is also affecting races like this.
Is there a generational aspect here? Because when you're talking about fight, when you're talking about effectiveness, I often hear from young people that they feel like Democrats are too old, and there's a lot of the Democrats in Congress, for instance, are too old, and they want them to kind of move on and hand the reins to the next generation. Is that something we see in polling?
For sure. And in fact, it's something that while younger voters do tend to be more likely to support these insurgent candidates is frankly something that we hear from older voters and more moderate voters pretty often. A lot of these kind of insurgent Democratic candidates are actually doing pretty well among more moderate voters. Mamdani's popularity numbers among moderate Democrats are really good. A lot of voters don't really perceive these candidates as being ideological choices so much as kind of freshening up politics and working outside of systems and these other things that certainly appeal more to young Democrats, more progressive Democrats. But we're seeing from that sentiment from pretty centrist Democrats and older Democrats too.
Why do you think this message is resonating specifically with younger people? I mean, you mentioned that the message resonates with moderates and with older people too, but I'm curious about the younger people. What are you seeing in polls that makes like DSA, Democratic Socialists of America messaging specifically resonate with people who are younger?
Pretty much all voters are cynical about how the system works, but that's a great question. But younger
reporters too.
Right. Yeah, no kidding. Younger voters do tend to see the system as much more structurally broken when you ask them polling questions. And I think that the sort of throw them out and start anew politically message resonates pretty strongly with younger voters. Also, in general, younger voters tend to be a little bit more to the left. So to the extent that ideology is involved here, that certainly is helping these insurgent candidates among younger voters too.
Yeah. And, looking at this particular race in the 43rd, Hannah Sabio Howell isn't an official DSA candidate, but she has aligned herself a little bit with the messaging of the group. She was endorsed by State Representative Sean Scott, who is a registered member of the DSA. What are the demographics in the 43rd, and do you expect a similar break from young people for a more progressive challenger there?
Yeah, the 43rd is kind of our core Seattle district. So it's from Capitol Hill through some of the more residential areas like Madison Park and into North Seattle. So it's definitely one of our most progressive districts. Donald Trump got well under 10% of the vote here. The Democrats include the younger and more left electorate in Capitol Hill, but this also includes some more older and residential parts of Seattle too. So it's not necessarily a DSA stronghold to the extent that we have any of those, but it is definitely the legislative district, or at least one of the top two or three where a young DSA affiliated candidate is really in the hunt in the general election electorate potentially. The 37th and Rainier Valley being the kind of other key district where you've got this strong base of young and progressive left-leaning voters.
Yeah, absolutely. I live in the 37th and definitely see that. So I think this 43rd race though is really interesting because there doesn't seem to be much of a difference in policy. It's almost like you can absolutely. It is purely vibes, right? It's purely a race. I mean, I think Hannah Sabio Howell would maybe disagree with me, but it is one of those races where you can say, like, if there's no big difference in policy here, Senate Majority Leader Peterson, passed the millionaire's tax. Labor has called him the most progressive caucus leader in state history. He was endorsed by the stranger. It really is just like, do these voters want a younger challenger? Do you think that accusations that he's like not progressive enough, these accusations that he is sort of like, well, he works for McKinstry, he makes a lot of money, do you think those things will stick?
I think, frankly, it's going to be tougher to get those accusations to stick to Senator Peterson than it might be some other politicians. This is not somebody who's got the association of being kind of a moderate establishment figure. This is no Andrew Cuomo, a candidate that really kind of radiated establishment sclerosis.
You should just say former governor of New York,
right.
running against Mamdani, lost embarrassingly to Mamdani in the primary.
That's right, yeah.
Right. And Jamie Peterson, I think for most Seattle voters is probably most associated with the millionaire's tax right now. And for your voter who, tunes in for a primary election, but maybe is a little less involved in these kind of DSA versus Democratic Party establishment stakes, that's going to be a lot tougher to, tar him with the image of being a squishy corporate centrist than some other Democrats in some other cities. So Seattle's unique political situation is worth considering. And it's worth considering that, even recently, not every big city election has really gone towards the more lefty candidates. We recently saw in San Francisco, tickets that are more associated with kind of the moderate establishment did pretty well. So there are a lot of Seattle specific things in this race. And at the end of the day, I think that those probably are a great deal of why Peterson is probably pretty heavily favored in this race.
Ben, we've been talking mostly about legislative races here. The 43rd, you mentioned the 37th, the south of us. Are there other races that we should be keeping an eye on that where we might see this inter-party Democrat on Democrat fighting, like maybe congressional races that we should keep an eye on where this might be playing out?
Yeah, just around the Seattle area, we've got a few similar races up in the 32nd district, which includes Shoreline and Edmonds.
Which is a legislative district, just to be clear.
Yes, yep. We've got a incumbent House member challenging a more moderate incumbent state senator. And out in the 48th, which is...
And that's Cindy Ryu and Jesse Solomon.
Correct.
And Libby's been interviewing candidates in that district all week on Soundside.
Very interesting race. A lot more suburban, older electorate there. And then out in the 48th legislative district, which is Bellevue and Redmond, we've got incumbent Amy Wallen challenged by a insurgent lefty candidate. It's one several challenges from the left that we've seen out in the East Side, which is very interesting because I don't think 20, 25 years ago we would ever imagined that races in Bellevue would come down to who's the more progressive Democrat.
And that one's so interesting because Amy Wallen, if I remember correctly, did vote against the millionaire's tax. She is maybe that kind of what you might imagine as a pro-business. What people are trying to say Peterson is a pro-business Democrat. She actually is more, she owns a car dealership. She voted against the millionaire's tax. So that is more of a classic moderate Democrat versus progressive challenger.
Yep, and a markedly different district too. This is actually the district where the most voters will pay the millionaire's tax. Not many of them, but Bellevue and Redwood are different territory, and it's interesting to see these similar dynamics play out on different topography here.
What about the 9th Congressional District, Adam Smith's district? What about that fight? Is that something where we might see some of these similar dynamics? And Kshama Sawant is challenging him for that seat.
Yeah, in the primary in the 9th Congressional District, we're definitely seeing, at least on the Democratic side, that division crop up. In fact, Melissa Chaudhry, in addition to Kshama Sawant, is kind of representing the more leftist flank of the Democratic Party there. It'll be interesting to see if that particular race makes it past the primary. There is a Republican in there, and that district has a few more Republicans than your Seattle-based districts because it extends down through Renton, Bellevue. But another place where that dynamic is very clearly defining the race.
Yeah, you've got not only Sawant, not only a pro-Palestinian Democrat, Melissa Chaudhry, trying to get that second spot after Adam Smith, vying with a Republican for it. You also have another socialist. I can't even remember their name. There is another socialist running against them, against Sawant, last time I checked.
Wow.
So it's really messy down there, and I don't think we're going to see the same dynamics. But obviously we are trying to take a big national narrative and paint it onto our little local area. So I guess my last question for you is, the dynamics in Washington State are a lot different than New York or Colorado, right? Like, how do you see, we've seen our state go a lot more to the left, especially in the last 10 years that Donald Trump has dominated national politics. Our voters, just even Republicans, it seems, don't really like, or more centrist voters, they just don't seem to like Donald Trump. As a result, do you think that Western Washington, you have a Democratic Party that is a little bit more, that they have sort of taken a lot of ideas from the more lefty groups like the socialists, and so that's why we don't see as many of those DSA candidates like really doing well out here? I guess, how do we differ from a place like New York?
That's an excellent question. And I think it's also worth considering that our local Democratic Party is in many ways a little bit more DSA friendly than some others. There's been kind of cross-pollination there. They've endorsed DSA candidates pretty frequently. And if anything, the local Democratic Party pretty reliably tends to go toward the more left-leaning candidates in most races. So I think that and the general knowledge that even from voters who don't pay attention to the establishment party, just the knowledge that pretty much any Democrat you get around here is going to nod along with them on the big national issues, I think is kind of assumed by voters here in a way where it's not necessarily in areas like New York, where you have what you might consider kind of more blue dog-ish Democratic roots in some areas. So that, I think, is a big insulating factor for the Democratic Party and insurgent candidates here, and maybe part of why we haven't up until now, despite plenty of D versus D races, seen quite as many insurgent wins as in some other lefty states.
Yeah, there's not that like doom. The centrist Democrats, even out here, aren't saying like the socialists are going to end the Democratic Party. Like you don't hear that Tom Suozzi like kind of rhetoric out here so much.
Ben Anderstone is a partner at Progressive Strategies Northwest. Ben, thank you so much for being here with us.
Thanks so much for having me.
And that is all the time we have for this week. Sarah, thanks for being on the show with us today. You are Sarah Meisestan, KUOW's state government reporter. Thank you again for being here.
Of course, yes. Thanks so much for having me, as always.
And that is it for Sound Politics. I'm Scott Greenstone. Our producer is Hans Anderson. Our editor is you, Cat Smith.
That's right. And this show is only possible because of your support, listener. Please consider a donation at kuow.org/politics.
We'll see you next week.